The courtroom was supposed to be calm that morning. Rows of polished benches reflected the overhead lights, and whispers of spectators floated like faint echoes against marble walls. Then, in the middle of tense questioning, something unexpected happened. Just as Stephen Breyer leaned back, let out a sudden laugh, sharp, dismissive, echoing through the chamber. It wasn't the warm laugh of humor. It was the laughter of someone brushing aside a challenge. And at that moment, all eyes shifted to Representative Jasmine Crockett. Breyer's laughter wasn't just sound. It was a statement, a declaration, that her words, her passion, her fight for dignity were not worth the weight of seriousness. Too many in that courtroom, it seemed like the condescending chuckle of power-mocking persistence. A murmur rolled through the chamber, some gasping, some smiling nervously, as if they'd just witnessed an invisible line being crossed. Crockett didn't flinch, eyes locked on him, sharp and unblinking. She didn't retreat, didn't lower. Her tone didn't shrink in the shadow of that powerful laugh. The silence after was more deafening than the laughter itself. You could feel the tension crawling along the wood and stone, wrapping around every ear in the room. And then came the moment, the pause that stretched, the breath that carried the weight of centuries of struggle and defiance. When Crockett finally opened her mouth, her voice didn't rise. It cooled. Her words sliced through the chamber like ice, carrying not just argument but history, not just rebuttal but revelation. The laughter had died, but what followed would turn the air heavy, still and unforgettable. Because her next line, it didn't just silence the room, froze it. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, we need to step back into the larger story, into the rising stakes that made one laugh and one line echo across America. The laugh might have seemed small to an outsider. It's just a chuckle, a ripple of amusement in a solemn room. But in America, in this moment, it meant more. It was a symbol, a sharp reminder of who has historically been allowed to laugh and who has been forced to remain silent. A single laugh can carry centuries of arrogance, centuries of dismissal. And that is exactly why Jasmine Crockett refused to let it pass. Because what was at stake here wasn't just her reputation. It wasn't even just the respect of one courtroom. What was at stake was dignity itself, the dignity of communities who have been told to wait their turn, to swallow the insult, to accept that power has the right to mock them. Breyer's laugh wasn't only about her. It was about the millions who saw themselves in her. People who've been spoken over in classrooms. People who've been laughed at in boardrooms. People who've been told, in subtle and not so subtle ways, that their words don't carry the same weight. And Crockett's silence in that frozen second carried all their voices. But the stakes were higher than even that. This wasn't just a moment of personal respect. This was America at a crossroads. Identity, justice, power, these were the battlegrounds of the 21st century. Every camera lens in that courtroom was transmitting not just a dispute, but a drama. About what kind of country America wanted to be. Would America remain a place where authority could laugh off challenges, dismissing them with a smirk? Or would it become the kind of place where voices from every walk of life could stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful in the land, demanding not charity, but equality? And so the laugh wasn't harmless, it was a spark. Because everyone in the room felt it, the tension building like a wire pulled too tight. Crockett's supporters shifted in their seats, bracing for impact. Breyer's allies looked on, confident, perhaps too confident, that the moment would pass. But Crockett had other plans. She wasn't there to play for laughs. She was there to draw a line. And that line was about to be crossed in front of millions. Because what happened next? Her words. Her ice-cold delivery, the way the entire chamber seemed to stop breathing, would not stay confined to those marble walls. It would spill out into the news cycle, into social media feeds, into dinner table conversations. It would remind people of something they often forget, that dignity doesn't whisper. It answers. And when it answers, history listens. But before we witness the explosion, before we see her words pierce the air like frost, we need to understand the man who laughed. Who was Stephen Breyer in this moment? What history? What contradictions? What power led him to believe he could dismiss her with a laugh? To understand the power of that laugh, you first have to understand the man behind it. Stephen Breyer was not just any judge. For decades, He sat in one of the highest seats of American justice, cloaked in the authority of the Supreme Court. He had built a reputation as the intellectual, the pragmatist, the calm and measured voice in the storm of political division. To many, he was the face of experience, reason, and moderation. But to others, there was something colder beneath the robe. Breyer's career had been defined by the careful balancing of power, by the kind of detached wisdom that could decide the fate of millions with the stroke of a pen. He was a man who believed in institutions, in rules, in the notion that stability mattered more than disruption. And yet, behind the dignity of his position, there was a flaw, subtle arrogance that often showed in the smallest of gestures: a raised eyebrow, a dismissive chuckle, a habit of listening with his lips pursed, as though the words of others were often more noise than substance. This was the Breyer that surfaced in that courtroom, not the wise statesman, but the embodiment of the establishment that believes it. Has heard every argument before, therefore no new voice could possibly matter. His laugh, short and sharp, carried the weight of that history. It said, without words, "I have seen it all. And you are not new. You are not special. You are not serious." But history complicates villains. Breyer was not a man of cruelty. He did not wield power with open malice. Instead, his flaw was subtler and therefore more dangerous. He represented the quiet dismissal, the institutional shrugged, the belief that those fighting for dignity were simply performing passion plays that the seasoned elite could afford to ignore. And in that way, his laugh was worse than a direct insult. An insult at least acknowledges you. A laugh erases you. For years, Breyer had been praised for his wit, for the way he could disarm a tense hearing with humor. Reporters wrote about his sharp mind, his ability to cut through legal jargon with a joke or a story. His colleagues admired his ability to lighten the mood. But there is a thin line between humor and mockery. And when humor comes at the expense of those fighting for respect, it ceases to be a charm, becomes a weapon. That is what happened here. In that courtroom, his laugh wasn't just a quirk of personality. It was the old guard mocking the new. It was the voice of privilege, the chuckle of an America that believed it had already given enough, already listened enough, already bent far enough. To him, her words were perhaps earnest, but unnecessary. To him, she was perhaps a passionate figure, but ultimately another face in a long parade of challengers. But arrogance carries a cost, because what Breyer failed to recognize was that the America of 2025 was not the America of 1995. This was an America where every word, every gesture, every laugh was captured, dissected, replayed millions of times in the echo chamber of social media. In this new America, a single laugh could become the symbol of dismissal, and a single response could become the anthem of defiance. And so, when Breyer laughed, he wasn't just laughing at Jasmine Crockett. He was laughing at everyone who had ever been told their voice didn't matter, and he didn't know it yet. But that laugh would not go unanswered, because Jasmine Crockett had come prepared not just with arguments, but with fire. And while Breyer's laugh was the weapon of dismissal, her words would be the blade of truth. But who exactly was Jasmine Crockett? And why did this moment, this laugh, ignite such a storm inside her? To see why she stood so firmly, we must step into her story, the story of a woman who carried the weight of generations, the story of a hero in waiting. The courtroom was buzzing with tension, the kind you could almost feel crawling across your skin. Lawyers shifted papers nervously, reporters tightened their grips on their pens, and every spectator leaned forward as if they knew something unforgettable was about to unfold. Judge Stephen Breyer is known for his sharp intellect, but also for his occasional flashes of humor, had just broken the heavy air with a rare chuckle. It wasn't a booming laugh, nor was it careless. It was more like a release valve hissing for a moment in the middle of unbearable pressure. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett, standing tall with an unmistakable fire in her eyes, allowed herself the faintest smile. For an instant, the tension cracked, and even the most hardened faces couldn't resist softening. But what happened next? No one expected. The laughter turns Breyer, leaned back slightly in his chair, glasses glinting under the cold courtroom. Lights, his laugh wasn't mocking, but it carried the weight of subtle disbelief. It was the kind of laugh that said, "Really? That's your argument? The attorneys exchanged quick glances, unsure whether to be amused or terrified. And the audience, those who had come hoping for a headline, were getting far more than they bargained for. That single laugh felt like a spark in a room filled with dry straw. All it would take was one sharp word, one bold response, to turn levity into something unforgettable. Crockett's gaze, Jasmine. Crockett's expression shifted in a heartbeat. The smile faded, her shoulders straightened, and the softness vanished from her tone. She wasn't here to be laughed at. She wasn't here to entertain. Her eyes locked directly on the bench where Breyer sat. It was as if the entire courtroom ceased to exist. No spectators, no reporters, no opposing lawyers. Just her voice and the weight of history pressing down on this very moment. And then, in a voice that cut through the laughter like a blade slicing silk, she spoke. "The line that froze the court, Your Honor," she began, her words slow and deliberate. "It may be easy to laugh at me, but what's not so easy, what's never easy is laughing at the truth." The room froze. Reporters' pens hovered, not daring to scratch the paper yet. The opposing counsel stiffened, sensing the shift in momentum. The gallery that had moments ago carried an undercurrent of humor now felt suffocated by silence. Breyer's smile faltered not out of shame, but out of recognition. Crockett had seized the moment, and she wasn't letting go. She continued, her tone sharper now, each word echoing like footsteps in an empty hall. "The truth isn't entertaining. The truth isn't comfortable. It certainly isn't here to make anyone laugh. But if this court cannot face it, then what exactly are we doing here?" The cold silence, the words hit like a cold wave crashing over the room. You could almost hear the collective breath being held. Even the sound of the ceiling fan above seemed to quiet itself, unwilling to interrupt. Breyer adjusted his glasses, leaned forward, and for the first time that day, did not interrupt, did not smirk, did not chuckle. Jasmine Crockett had shifted the entire energy of the courtroom with a single, cold truth. The laughter was gone. In its place was a silence so heavy, it felt like judgment itself had descended upon the chamber. The atmosphere shifts from the corner. A journalist whispered to another, "Did she just shut the entire room down?" But the whisper barely left his lips before he realized even whispers felt out of place in that silence. Crockett wasn't finished. She took a step forward, her voice steady and commanding. "You see, laughter fades, but what won't fade is accountability. And if we choose to laugh instead of face it, then this institution becomes nothing more than theater." The gallery shifted uncomfortably. Lawyers stared down at their notes, suddenly uninterested in the words on the page. Cameras zoomed in, knowing that this clip, this exact moment, would play endlessly across headlines, across feeds, across the country. Breyer's response: for a long moment, Judge Breyer said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any reprimand could. His hands folded, his lips pressed together, and his eyes fixed on Crockett, with the kind of seriousness that only comes when someone realizes they've been caught under the weight of truth. Finally, he spoke. His tone was measured, stripped of any humor. "Miss Crockett," he said quietly, "you may continue." It wasn't much, but those 3 words were an admission. An acknowledgement that the room no longer belonged to the laughter, but to her. The ice-cold grip. Crockett nodded once, calm but resolute. She had not just won a point in argument. She had turned the entire atmosphere of the courtroom into her. Allie, did every spectator knew they had witnessed something more than a heated exchange. This was a clash between power and truth, between levity and gravity, and in that clash, it was the truth that had prevailed. From that moment onward, every word she spoke carried a different weight. Every phrase felt sharpened by the silence. That followed her cold rebuke. The laugh had sparked the moment, but her response had frozen it in time. And as the hearing continued, one reality was undeniable. The courtroom would leave that day remembering not the laugh, not the joke, but the silence after her words, the silence that felt colder, sharper, and more permanent than anything else that had been said. Because sometimes, all it takes is one line to change the entire course of a room, and Jasmine Crockett had just delivered it. The courtroom was silent again. But this silence wasn't ordinary. It was sharp, heavy, almost electric. Moments before, Justice Stephen Breyer had shared a rare laugh, a lighthearted chuckle that briefly softened the air of this tense trial. But laughter inside the Supreme Court is never just laughter. Every sound, every pause, every smirk carries weight. And Jasmine Crockett knew it. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm yet edged with fire, and in that instant the entire chamber seemed to lean with her. Her next words were not just for the justices. They were for the record. They were for history. Because Crockett understood something many forget. The court isn't only about law, it's about narrative. While Breyer's laugh momentarily shifted, the energy Crockett was determined to shift the entire conversation. She wasn't just answering a question. She was reframing the battle itself. Imagine the pressure. On one side, the immense weight of legal tradition, the measured voices of justices who had seen decades of cases. On the other side, a young, unflinching voice refusing to bend, refusing to let the laughter diminish the gravity of her truth. The clash wasn't just between two individuals. It was generational. It was ideological. It was about what kind of America would exist on the other side of this ruling. And here's what made the moment ice cold. Jasmine Crockett paused, letting the laughter echo out of memory, and then delivered a line so razor-sharp, so precisely timed, that even those who had been smirking seconds earlier found themselves staring in stunned silence. Her tone was respectful, but unyielding, measured, but merciless. In one strike, she reminded the court that their humor, their comfort, even their status, was nothing compared to the weight of justice being debated. The transformation in the room was palpable. Where a moment ago, there was levity. Now, there was tension so thick, it felt like the temperature had dropped. Breyer's smile faded. Other justices shifted uncomfortably. The laugh was gone. The reality had returned, because that's the essence of courtroom strategy. One moment of levity can disarm the audience. One precise, fearless line can reshape the entire trial. And Jasmine Crockett had just done exactly that. The courtroom had been buzzing only moments ago. Reporters scribbled in their notepads. Cameras clicked faintly in the background. And political commentators whispered predictions under their breath. But then, everything froze. Jasmine Crockett, standing tall in her sharp navy blue suit, had just dropped a line so piercing that it sliced through the noise like a razor dot. Judge Stephen Breyer, moments earlier chuckling lightly as if brushing aside her fiery statement, suddenly shifted in his seat. His smile faded. His glasses slid a little down his nose as he leaned forward, almost as though he needed to take a second look not at the evidence. Not at the law books stacked beside him, but at her resolve. The silence was electric. Not the silence of routine legal proceedings, but the kind of silence that drapes itself over a room when everyone knows. They've just witnessed a turning point. Crockett's eyes scanned the room. Her voice, steady but burning with conviction, carried a force that no laughter could dismiss. With all due respect, Judge, this isn't about formality. This is about the foundation of our democracy. Gasps echoed softly. Even the attorneys, who had come prepared to cross swords with her, found themselves momentarily disarmed. The jury, though silent, sat a little straighter. Court clerks who had grown numb to the monotony of testimony found their pens hovering in midair. Judge Breyer finally spoke, his voice lower now, measured, stripped of the casual humor that had earlier rippled through the chamber. "Proceed," he said almost reluctantly. But that single word was more than permission, it was acknowledgement. He had recognized the weight behind Crockett's words. And here's the fascinating twist. This moment wasn't just legal drama. It wasn't just courtroom theatrics. Outside these walls, this very exchange was about to explode across social media, mainstream news, and political talk shows. Millions would see the clip, dissect it, and argue over what it meant for the balance of power. Some would call it Crockett's defining moment. Others would brand it as reckless. But absolutely no one could ignore it. Because in that courtroom, Judge Breyer's laughter had evaporated, and Jasmine Crockett, she had turned the atmosphere to ice. The air inside the courtroom changed in an instant. Moments ago, the room had echoed with laughter. Judge Stephen Breyer's soft chuckle had spread like a ripple, lightening the mood, reminding everyone that even in tense political and legal battles, humor still found its place. But Jasmine Crockett was not finished. Not even close. She leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice steady, delivered her next line, a line so piercing, so brutally honest, that it cut through the laughter like a knife through glass. "Your Honor," she said, her tone laced with fire, "what you find amusing, millions of Americans find devastating. Because behind every policy you dismiss with a smile, there are real people, families, who are paying the price." The words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, no one dared to move. The laughter died instantly. The room froze. And Judge Breyer, still holding the faintest trace of a grin, felt it slip away. His smile faded into silence. His eyes, once playful, narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition. Recognition that this was no ordinary political exchange. Crockett had turned the tables. What had started as a moment of levity had transformed into a moment of raw truth. She had shifted the energy of the room with surgical precision, from humor to gravity, from lightness to weight, from laughter to silence. Even those who had chuckled along moments before now sat stone-faced, realizing the depth of what had just been said. Cameras zoomed in, reporters scribbled furiously, and the clip, even before it hit the internet, was already destined to go viral, because this was more than a courtroom exchange. This was a cultural moment. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier than ever. Every shuffle of paper, every cough, every sigh seemed magnified in the silence that followed Jasmine Crockett's fiery words. For a moment, it was as if time had frozen. Judge Stephen Breyer, usually calm and unflappable, leaned slightly forward. His face still held traces of the laughter from moments ago, but now it was fading, replaced by something far more serious. The court reporters' fingers hovered over their keys, ready to capture every word that could potentially shift the course of this hearing. Jasmine stood firm, her eyes locked on the bench. She wasn't just speaking anymore, she was commanding. The room, the transformation, was undeniable. Only moments ago, the judge's chuckle seemed to belittle her. But now, every juror, every lawyer, every spectator in the gallery was watching her with a different kind of respect. Her voice, steady but burning with intensity, carried a challenge. If this court cannot acknowledge the truth, then it fails not only me, it fails the very people it claims to serve. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Breyer's expression stiffened. He tapped his gavel once, almost out of instinct, as if trying to regain control of the energy in the room. But control was already slipping, not from his hands, but into hers. You could feel the shift. What began as laughter had turned into a moment of reckoning. This wasn't just a courtroom exchange anymore. It was political theater at its rawest, a battle of wit, authority, and conviction. Somewhere, in the back, a spectator whispered, "This just changed everything." And indeed it had. As the dust settled from that chilling courtroom exchange, the ripple effects began spreading across the media landscape. Newsrooms scrambled to capture the moment. Headlines blared across TV chyrons and online platforms. Breyer laughs, court freezes, Crockett's cold lines stuns judiciary, an unprecedented exchange in Supreme Court. Every network wanted a piece of the story. CNN ran wall-to-wall coverage, breaking down Crockett's words line by line. Fox News painted her statement as a political stunt designed to rattle the institution. MSNBC hailed it as a rare and a raw moment of honesty in the highest court of the land. Social media, of course, went wild. Within hours, hashtags like hashtag Crockett clap back and hashtag Breyer laughs were trending globally. Clips of the moment spread like wildfire. On TikTok, creators remixed Breyer's laughter with dramatic sound effects, only to freeze frame on Crockett's cutting words. Twitter users debated endlessly, some praising her bravery, others condemning her tone. Memes flooded Instagram. Breyer chuckling with captions, "When you laugh too early," followed by images of ice, snow, frozen courts. But beneath the memes and debates lay a deeper question. What did this moment really mean for it? America's judicial and political future. For many, Crockett's line wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a symbolic challenge to a system that often seemed untouchable. It tapped into long-simmering frustrations about transparency, accountability, and whether the courts truly serve the people in political circles. Strategists immediately sensed the impact. Some saw Crockett's move as a gamble that paid off, portraying her as fearless and unshaken, even under the most intimidating circumstances. Others whispered that the moment might haunt her, painting her as too confrontational for a role that demanded respect for judicial tradition. Yet one thing was undeniable: the country was talking. Millions who rarely tuned into Supreme Court matters suddenly found themselves glued to the story. Dinner tables, classrooms, offices, everywhere. People debated what had just happened, and for Jasmine Crockett, the wave was only beginning to build, because what came next would determine whether this moment would fade into viral memory or ignite a movement. The courtroom that day was more than a legal stage. It became a mirror of America itself, its humor, its tension, its divisions, and its fragile hope. When Justice Stephen Breyer laughed, the world saw a flicker of humanity in the halls of ultimate judgment. But when Jasmine Crockett's words cut through the laughter and froze the air, the nation was reminded that truth still has the power to silence even the most powerful rooms. Breyer's laughter will be remembered as a symbol of levity. In a heavy age, Crockett's line, however, will be etched as a warning and icy reminder that democracy is fragile, and that courage often speaks not with volume, but with precision. This moment will echo far beyond the courtroom. Students of law will dissect it, commentators will replay it, voters will feel its tremor as they weigh the character of those who hold power. History, as it always does, will decide whether this clash was a turning point or just another spark in America's long struggle to reconcile power with justice. And that is the true legacy, not who won the exchange, but what it awakens. In us, the audience, does it call us to laugh, to fear, to act, or to simply remember that even in the grandest halls, truth can still cut through like ice? In the end, the legacy of this moment is ours too, right? Because a democracy is not built on courtrooms or Congress alone. It is built on memory, on courage, and on what we choose to carry forward. So as you leave this story tonight, ask yourself, when history looks back, will it remember only the laughter or the silence that followed?